So this is a big story that came out the other day that I wanted to share with you guys. This is interesting for a number of reasons. So the Associated Press is saying the following. News outlets were leaked insider material from the Trump campaign, and they chose not to print it. So as you're going to see here, the Trump campaign was allegedly hacked, and the media has some of the material. At least 3 news outlets were leaked confidential material from inside the Donald Trump campaign, including its report vetting J.D. Vance as a vice presidential candidate. So far, each has refused to reveal any details about what they received. Instead, Politico, the New York Times, and the Washington Post have written about a potential hack of the campaign and describe what they had in broad terms. Their decision stands in marked contrast to the 2016 presidential campaign, when a Russian hack exposed emails to and from Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, John Podesta. The website WikiLeaks published a trove of these embarrassing missives, I never know how to pronounce that word, and mainstream news organizations covered them avidly. Politico wrote over the weekend about receiving emails starting July 22nd from a person identified as Robert that included a 271-page campaign document about Vance and a partial vetting report on Senator Marco Rubio, who was also considered as a potential vice president. Both Politico and the Post said that 2 people had independently confirmed that the documents were authentic. Quote, like many such vetting documents the Times wrote of the Vance report, they contain past statements and with the potential to be embarrassing or damaging, such as Mr. Vance's remarks casting aspersions on Mr. Trump. What's unclear is who provided the material. Politico said it did not know who Robert was, and that when it spoke to the supposed leaker, he said, quote, I suggest you don't be curious about where I got them from. The Trump campaign said it had been hacked and that Iranians were behind it. While the campaign provided no evidence for the claim, it came a day after a Microsoft report detailed an effort by an Iranian military intelligence unit to compromise the email account of a former senior advisor to a presidential campaign. The report did not specify which campaign. Stephen Chung, a spokesperson for Trump's campaign, said over the weekend that any media or news outlet reprinting documents or internal communications are doing the bidding of America's enemies. The FBI released a brief statement Monday that read, we can confirm the FBI is investigating the matter. The Times said it would not discuss why it had decided not to print details of the internal communications. A spokesperson for the Post said, as with any information we receive, we take into account the authenticity of the materials, any motives of the source, and assess the public interest in making decisions about what, if anything, to publish. Brad Dayspring, a spokesperson for Politico, said editors there judged that the questions surrounding the origins of the documents and how they came to our attention were more newsworthy than the material that was in those documents. Indeed, it didn't take long after Vance was announced as Trump's running mate for various news organizations to dig up unflattering statements that the Ohio senator had made about him. Okay, so my initial reaction to this was as follows. Well, hold on now. When you guys got dirt on the Democrats, the media ran it, no questions asked, and it became a giant story. When Hunter Biden's laptop was hacked, a violation of his privacy, and that stuff got to news outlets, they ran with the story, right? So there appears to be a massive double standard and a lot of imbalance here between how hacked materials of Democrats are treated and hacked materials of Republicans are treated. So you're not going to run the specifics in this leak? Well, guys, the way journalism works is, honestly, it doesn't really matter where your source comes from. It doesn't. They might have their own motives. They might have their own reasons for doing it. But if it's in the public interest, that's the only thing that should concern you as a journalist. Like, I don't care if you get internal documents on the Hillary campaign. Whether or not it came from Russia, it doesn't matter. I don't care. If anything's in there are newsworthy, you absolutely should run it. Right? That's the way journalism works. That's the way it should work. There are protections, legal protections for journalists, that they don't have to give up their sources. And even if their sources have questionable motives, it's okay. They are protected by the First Amendment. So that was my first reaction to this is look at that imbalance. Look at that double standard. Look at that hypocrisy. If it's dirt on Democrats, they run it. If it's dirt on Republicans, they don't run it. So that was my first reaction. Then as I read more about it, my conclusion started to change a little bit. It is very possible that this is like a scheme by the Trump administration. And because Roger Stone, by the way, is involved in this. So it's very possible they are purposely leaking this stuff to the different news agencies. And they're going to claim, oh, Iran hacked us and these news agencies ran the stuff. And then they could use that to flip it on Democrats and flip it on the fake news media and say, look at them. They're in bed with Iran. They're in bed with our enemies. They're publishing things that are absolutely illegal. We got illegally hacked and they're doing this and there's going to be consequences. And then if Trump were to win, he can use this to go after the journalists who reported on these internal documents. It could very well be a massive scheme cooked up by Roger Stone and the even more nefarious elements of the Trump campaign and the Trump circles, right? And so it might actually be that the reason these outlets are not running it, they are being very strategic and they smell something fishy. They smell something fishy. They smell like, hold on, the stuff that's in these documents isn't really all that noteworthy anyway. And it looks like the Trump campaign wants us to run it. They're trying to get us to run it so that they could use this as a campaign issue and bash Democrats over the head with it, bash the fake news media over the head with it and say, look at them. They're working with our enemies. Can you believe it? Can you believe they're working with our enemies? Can you believe they illegally ran this? They didn't even vet it. They didn't even vet the source. Look at what they did. It's unbelievable. So I think it's certainly possible that there's something fishy. There's something suspect going on here. And then, of course, like I said, if they were to run it and if Trump were to turn it into a campaign issue, and they claim they're violating some sort of law, then if Trump were to become president again, it's go arrest that reporter at the New York Times and the Washington Post and Politico. You're going to lock them up because they could cook up whatever, rationalization, legal rationalization they want, and then they could try to test it in the courts, right? So I actually think they probably made the right decision by not running it, especially because from everything I've read about it, seems to indicate there's really nothing groundbreaking in there, right? It's just they dug into the past of both Marco Rubio and JD Vance, and they found the things that they said that were anti-Trump and whatever the scandals were that they were involved in, and it would just be a story on that. And the juice is not worth the squeeze, especially because it might be a trap. You might be looking at a trap here. So yeah, very, very bizarre. Everything about this story seems kind of fishy, and that's to say the least. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.